He wasn't going to miss this, please.
No, I don't think so.
Have enough room?
Yeah, I'm good.
Leader?
I'm good. Ready?
Questions?
I'd like to call the Board of Finance workshop for Monday, March 13th, 2017 to order. First order of business is public forum. Anyone wishing to address the board in public forum? Come on up. Name and address for the record.
Ted Zeus, 72 Broad Street. And I was wondering if the board could recap for the public's benefit. Basically, it was on the front page of the Courier about 2 weeks ago, which described the governor's budget and what the potential options were for the state. I'm sorry, I was wondering whether the board could recap for the public's benefit the front page of the Guilford Courier approximately 2 weeks ago, where it was discussed the interest in the governor's budget to ask towns to contribute a third of the teacher's pension fund, and what kinds of funds might be withdrawn by the state or not reimbursed related to the education cost sharing grant and any other state subsidies, so that we're aware of what the totality of that might be.
That's a good question. And I can't say I'll be true to the Hartford Current, but I will take the actual budget sheet for Guilford that was presented by Malloy's Office of Public, the OPM rather, Ben Barnes. And there are, as we've talked about the last couple of meetings, there are some dramatic proposed reductions by the governor, which has not yet been acted upon by the legislature. Let's work with some big numbers. We had about $2.9 million worth of ECS funding this year. The governor is proposing that all of that go away. There are some minor changes to a couple areas. Special education is slated to go from 1.16 million to 1.28. There are some additional funds in LOCIP, which is for road construction, about $252,000. There's about $200,000 in additional municipal revenue sharing grant. And Ted, I could certainly get you one of these if you want a copy of this at some point.
Right.
Okay. So suffice to say that 2017 statutory formula aid for Guilford was $4.99 million. The proposed amount for 2018, and again, proposed amount, is $2,613,000. But there is also a suggestion that the municipalities pick up a portion of this teachers' pensions. For those who aren't aware, the state funds the teachers' pension. Some will contend they don't fund it very well based on its performance. The methodology is the following. The state picks up contributes 30% of teachers' salaries. The employees, the teachers themselves, contribute 6% of their salaries. The governor has proposed that municipalities pick up 1/3 of the state's current contributions. So the amount would be 10% of our teachers' salaries, and that amount would be $2.87 million. So the net effect, and we mentioned this, I think, the last couple of meetings, is we would be in a negative position relative to state aid. As Joe Mazza says, it gives new definition to municipal aid because it becomes now state aid, since Guilford would have to write a check for $252,000 if the governor's suggested revisions were enacted into law. Does that answer it?
It does, with one exception. So if we were to add all that up, the actual percentage of the budget swing in terms of loss of revenue would be at what percentage?
It would be probably on the order of 5.5%, 5.7%, somewhere in that number, round numbers.
Yeah, based on the numbers that you've just read out, I come up with a little more. We had 2.9 million was the first number you referred to. Then there was a 0.5 million then 250,000. So that roughly adds up to $3.5 million, and then we had the 2.8 in the contribution.
It's $5 million. $5 million on a $95 million budget is a little over 5%, so 5.5, 5.75%.
Close to 6.
Close to 6. I'm not going to
Five
quibble
and
with you.
3/4, okay.
I'm not going to quibble with you.
All right. And so if we were to combine that potential loss in revenue for the town with the proposal of the budget that we have this evening, which is roughly a 2% spending increase, is that 2.09?
It is a 2.09% spending increase, right?
So the net effect of that, if we added all that together and all of that were to actually happen, it's somewhere about an 8%.
No, it'd be less than that because you're forgetting the grand list growth and a reprojection of the senior tax freeze cap. So there would be, what is it, Joe, about $580,000 to $600,000 in additional revenue generated locally. So it would be it's in the 7.5% range if this went through. You're absolutely right.
Right. So in having listened to the public hearing that took place last Thursday, there was some discussion about the likelihood, and there was some testimony or comment from various people about why the state either can't or won't do this, and the lack of enthusiasm among the various state representatives to support this concept. That's fair to say?
Fair to say. Yeah.
So one of the interesting things is if you read all the newspaper articles that are out today about all the things that the state has done to deal with its budget problems already, the state has already laid off 4,000 employees. There's a reduction in force of 4,000 employees according to Hartford Current about 3 or 4 days ago.
Over what time period then?
Pretty recent. I mean, in the last, they were using that number to counterbalance the fact that the state had grown 5,000 jobs over the last jobs thing and had laid off 4,000 municipal employees, and it was almost sort of a wash. That was the point of the article.
Okay.
And that if the state has full-time employees roughly in the $50,000 or 50,000 employee range, then that's roughly 8% of the state employees that the state has already reduced in salaries to try and deal with its budgetary crisis.
I think there's some discussion about what is it another 700,000 that they're looking for in concessions out of the state employees? And if
700 million.
700 million, not 700,000. Thank
right.
you for you rounded off here and there, right? But 700 million in concessions, which, as I understand it, if they don't get in negotiated concessions, is going to come out of labor in terms of jobs.
Right, I would agree with that.
Right.
The other thing the state has done is in 2008 they also borrowed $2 billion to make a contribution to the teachers' pension fund. You're aware of that, right?
Ted, can you get to a point at some point here?
Well, the point I'm trying to get to is that the gist of the conversation at the end of your meeting the other evening was that there is very little likelihood that we are going to experience the shortfall in revenue from the state, that the state, in fact, there isn't the stomach or the appetite among the legislature to really reduce that level of funding to the local towns.
Agree. That's a good encapsulation of where everybody is.
Right, and what I'm seeing is that the state has already done a lot of things, pulled out all the normal financial tricks and gymnastics that governments do to sort of postpone and stretch out debt and do all of that. They've already borrowed money for the teacher's pension. They already have contractual obligations to the bonding authority for that, stating that they have to now, going forward, fully fund the teacher's pension. They have to make the actuarial contributions on a yearly basis, so they can't borrow again or postpone that out. They've already laid off 8% of the state's workforce, and so the question is, where else can the state go other than what was also discussed, either raise income tax or sales tax? And I think that's true. So the point I'm trying to get to is no matter what happens here, Guilford, the town of Guilford, is part of the state. You know, there is no they and us. It is really we together in terms of solving this problem. And I think that it's important for the people in Guilford to realize that one way or another, whether it's through raised income tax in the next year or through raised sales tax or through raised property tax, we are going to bear the 7.5% that is our 7.5% here upcoming in terms of taxes. And if that is true, And if this were a normal business or any other entity in the world, the decision to decide to increase spending for the upcoming year by an additional 2% on top of that, most people might reflect on that and say this is not the year to do that. And I just think it's important for the public to contemplate this when we go to vote on an increase in spending in another month, not having the full information from the state, that these are the realities that we're going to be looking at. And there's been some discussion about that we would absorb the lack of revenue from the state by taking it out of undesignated fund balance. But in fact, we can only do that once or so, and then that's also carried forward because this is a 20-year problem that the state has. I mean, the level of underfunding, the state cumulatively, by the time they take the teacher unfunded pension and the municipal employee unfunded pension and also their building projects, I think they have a total obligation of about $65 billion, which is over 3 times what their annual budget is, right? So we have a 20-year problem, and it looks like that in this year, if we have a 7.5% increase in taxing at whatever level it takes and in whatever form it comes at, it's not like we just have to absorb that this year and next year it goes back to normal. That new bump in tax is going to is going to carry forward and be the new basis for the next 20 years. And if we look at companies like GE and we look at some of the insurance companies and some of the pharmaceutical companies that have already left the state, they got better financial planners perhaps than many of us have access to, and they may have seen this writing on the wall coming, maybe one of the reasons why they've decided to leave town, you know? So my suggestion, my preference would be that this not be the year that we decide to increase spending another 2% and we wait until we see what our new basis is, knowing that at one level or another, we're going to absorb 6% from the state at some level in some fashion.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the board? Hello.
Hi, I'm John Mayo, 199 Village Pond Road, and I see 3 of us from Village Pond Road in the room tonight, so I think that may be the best street here in town.
You guys get
all from different functions as well, too. I'm a swim parent. I wanted to officially thank Dr. Freeman for including the swim coach into the athletic budget. And we're talking $12,000 out of the multi-million-dollar budget. So in regard to that minuscule amount of what Mr. Zeus was just talking about, I just wanted to clear a few things up if we possibly could, because there were a few letters to the editor saying we have a swim coach coming. The next thing they're going to want a swimming pool. And we have never asked for a pool. It was not part of our discussion. We simply wanted to have a chance for our boys and girls to swim at the high school under the Guilford banner and have that opportunity, and Dr. Freeman included that into his budget. I'm here also as a parent. I have a 5th grader and a high school freshman, and this whole process has been wonderful. To start out in September with meetings with Dr. Freeman, Mr. Masensi, and Jake Jarvis, the athletic director, to come into this process, to have some parental input, to say we really want this to happen, for them to listen to us, to include it into the budget, and then for us to go through the whole process and learn more about how the education budget is brought forward. Some of the other things that are included in the budget, including the math coach. I'm a library media specialist in North Haven. I share my library with the math coach in our school. She started last year. To have a math coach in a building it's invaluable for the students, for the teachers, and to see that included in your budget is great, because now we have a math coach supported from the elementaries through Baldwin, through Adams, and into the high school, along with the reading specialist. So that is one of the very few increases that were added to Dr. Freeman's budget, along with the custodial care to take care of the science wing at the new high school. And I think we all agree with this beautiful high school, we need to upkeep what we have there. So I just wanted to clear a few points up about the swim team. We're not here for a swimming pool. It's a very minor amount, and I hope that you guys don't have any holes in your pockets for that loose change to fall out when we do proceed here. Thank you. And again, Dr. Freeman, thank you for all of your work and for the entire board as well.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the board?
That would be fun, wouldn't it?
Fine.
Karen Moriarty, Spruce Hill Drive. I also wanted to thank Dr. Freeman for including a swim team in the budget this year, just the coaches. I just to put forth, I just want to make everyone realize that swimmers are just such hard workers, and just to put it in perspective, during the height of my daughter's swim team, she swims for Madison Swim Club, during the height of the season was football season, and to put it in perspective, the football field is 100 yards. My daughter swims 11,000 of those at practice in one night at the height of the season. So they're just hard workers, and they deserve a chance to represent Guilford instead of every other town around them. I also am a big fan of the math coach. I think our reading and English scores are right up there with everybody else, and this will help to elevate the math scores. It's a slight increase in budget, and I think it's already trim and lean, and to cut any more from it, especially a swim team, would be not beneficial for the students of Guilford. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to address the board? No? Going once? Going twice? Sold. All right. I know we've been at this for several meetings, but one last round of questions for folks who may have some questions of either Board of Selectmen or the Board of Education. Anybody have anything? Ken?
Yeah, we've heard a lot from the Board of Education on ROI, return on investment, and especially Mr. Boss, who's ticked off myriad statistics which have been impressive, I must say. We actually haven't heard the same kind of ROI feedback from the town. And I'd like to ask the First Selectman if he would address this whole concept of return on investment, which to us as citizens of this town really means the services and the goods that we get. And I think this would be an important moment to get this on the public record.
Welcome back, Ken. I wish you were here the last couple of nights.
Questions like that.
I think if you look out your window tomorrow, you'll see some of the services that you're going to get for your dollars. Right?
If we survive the next 24 hours.
You will. Our guys will be out there, men and women will be out there protecting you and your investments in your property. What would you like me to address?
Well, for example...
Well, let me tell you. Okay?
No, I'd
Okay.
be happy to start you with it.
All right.
The number of calls that our police and fire respond to annually.
Okay. We'll start with the fire department. During any one year, there are over 3,500 calls. Last fiscal year, and I would give you this year, but we haven't completed it yet, to keep things in perspective, we are up over 100 calls, 3,600 calls. If you have the time, I'll invite you up to my office to sit next to the scanner, and you'll hear how many ambulance calls a day we get. And that's not counting response calls for fires and for response calls for accidents up on I-95. And we are the response team for the hazardous incidents, for chemical spills and that sort of thing, for the region. Okay. As far as police, we are up about 17% this year on calls. We respond to about 11,000 calls on average a year. Okay. We have 37 sworn officers, 24/7. As far as public works goes, as you know, the town hasn't grown. We only have a certain amount of acreage, 48 square miles, excuse me. But it's one of the largest towns in the state, with number 6. We have about 17 maintainers to take care of 748 square miles. Tomorrow, and for probably the next 48 hours, they will plow 186 miles of town road, not state road, town road. It's not to count our public, our park and rec people who augment them, and some of our town hall maintenance people who help plow the sidewalks. Okay. Our youth and family service department services about 260 clients a year that they bill out. They run 1,500 programs. They have participants for that amount. 1,500 people participate in their programs. And the police chief is here, and he can back me up on this. If it wasn't for Youth and Family Services, those 11,000 calls, we probably would increase those by half that amount. Okay. Our Park and Rec runs 741 classes a year with 8,000 participants. We have 22,000 participants in our special events, 3,000 individuals and groups reserve the rooms in this building here, at Jacobs Beach, and also at Lake Quantipoc. And you see the results on our financial revenue reports. Meals on Wheels. They prepare 33,000 meals a year, right out of that kitchen in the back. Okay. We service 2,200 seniors in our program. It's one of the best senior programs in the region. If you come here on any one day during the week, you'll find out that there are seniors from other towns who belong to our senior programs. And they pay to belong to those programs. Okay? We provide, and that's why we're asking for a new bus this year, 10,000 rides for our seniors. Brings them to various appointments, various doctor's appointments all through the year. The Park and Rec also maintains 40 athletic fields, including school fields. It's about 100 acres. We also provide the services at the mill pond when it freezes over. It might happen maybe tomorrow, who knows. And they, like I said before, they assist Public Works with snow removal for the town lots and the sidewalks. And I did not mention social services. We provide services for 641 households. These are people who are, Guilford is considered, according to the state, a very wealthy town, but I'll argue that because If it's very wealthy, I don't know what I'm doing here. But 641 households who need either fuel assistance or assistance paying their rent, or need food stamps, or have to go to the food bank to get to put food on their tables. And we have three people in that department servicing them. So that's part of the services that we provide. And if you allow me, I'll mention the library, because that's an integral part of the services in town. 260,000 circulation there. That means books, periodicals that they lend out. They have 16,700 card-carrying members. We have 22,500 in this town. That's a pretty big number that belongs to the library. Is that okay?
Good,
Did I answer your question?
very good.
Okay.
Is it worth 2%?
I think so. Okay.
I have a question. Go. If I can jump in? Yeah.
So we spent a lot of time over the last couple of meetings talking about revenue. We heard from one of our speakers today about revenue. One small item that I saw in the selectmen's revision is you're proposing an additional $10,000 distribution from Kerma. This is in the insurance section, obviously. Are they projecting that? What's that based on, that additional $10,000? We had previously booked $10,000 for the past 2 years, and now this year a total of $20,000.
Yeah, I'll just clarify that. That's a revenue item.
Yes, it is a revenue item.
Yeah, you're right. That is a revenue item. Kerma is a equity firm. It's where we buy our insurance, and Kerma's been doing very well with their member policies. And instead of keeping all of their profits, they distribute the profits.
Like a mutual. It's a mutual.
Like a mutual fund. It is a mutual fund. Almost a mutual fund. It's a mutual company.
Yeah.
And in the last several years, we've been fortunate to share in their profits. And I think it was, we got 47,000 last year. We're being very conservative. So we decided to bump our projections up from 10 to 20. Okay. Now, they said that they're going to have a distribution at the end of, the end of this year, but it would be next budget. Mm-hmm. So we're conservatively budgeting 20,000, but they haven't given us any indication what our share would be. That's as long as we stay with them, by the way.
Sure,
Okay.
right, of course. But over the past couple of years, you're saying they've paid more than had been budgeted?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's based on some experience that you've
But
had with them.
it's never certain that we'll get it.
I fully understand.
Okay.
But I understand the basis for why you did it now, based on what has happened.
Any other questions?
On here.
Peter? Certainly. Mike, whose was yours for?
I'm sorry?
Did you have a question? Was it for Joe or Dr. Freeman?
No,
Peter's
it's
got it.
Dr. Freeman.
All right. Peter's first. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, I just wanted to discuss...
Excuse me, I'd like to add one thing, if you don't mind.
Certainly.
If you are to cut anything from the Board of Selectmen budget, I would like to add one bonding appropriation at that time.
Okay.
So do you want me to do it now or wait until later?
Why don't you tell us what it is now?
Okay. Depending on the cut, if it's more than $75,000, I would like to add a bonding appropriation of $125,000. Because if it's more than $75,000, I would reduce our capital operating fund by $74,221,000, and that would be for our back scanning program, and that is over a 2-year period, it would add up to about 120,000, and so we would fund 125,000 to take care of the program completely. And I spoke to bond counsel. It is appropriate to bond that, and therefore we can take it out of the operating budget and put it into a bonding question. And like I said, bond counsel is fully on board with that, if you reduce our budget. If not, I would keep it into the operating budget.
And that's information systems, is that what it is?
That's correct. It's under our capital department.
Got it.
And Joe, just fill us in, that's backscanning records in Town Hall?
Town Hall South. That would be for all the building permits, health department permits, maps, all the GIS. That would then become integrated with our Munis system, something that's sorely needed.
So that would mean that those records would then be electronically stored and available?
Correct, instead of on microfiche and that sort of thing. Okay.
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 I saw that item in the bonding, and I was curious about that.
Yeah.
It's interesting that came up. Okay. So we walk through that again. So if you bond it, you would do
Take it
the
out of
entire
capital?
project,
I would do the entire project this year,
as opposed to
as
breaking it
opposed to
up?
spreading it off 2 years.
Okay.
Okay?
Got it.
If you had to cut. That's my proposal.
Is there any savings in doing it that way if you do the entire project?
No, there's no
With the
saving.
contractor, I mean?
It just would reduce our budget
This year?
this year.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
And that's the
then
technology.
if you went beyond the 75, I could, up to 100, I could find the rest, so. Okay.
And that's
I'm
the,
not saying we won't do it, but
that's the technology item under capital.
that's correct, yeah.
126, I've been moved that over.
No,
No,
that's
it's just 74 of it.
74, okay. Okay, yeah, okay. I got it.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Joe, one quick question. The Long Hill Road reconstruction project, which has just gotten started, is projected to cost $4 million. We are going to pay 10% of that, or $400,000. I believe there's also a maintenance contract in addition to the $4 million that we're going to have to pay for.
No, that's all included.
Okay.
That's all
The
included.
$400,000, is that in the budget? I don't see it in summer or winter road construction. I assume, perhaps incorrectly, that it is going to come out of the $1 million bond request for inland road construction. How is that
Yeah,
going to-
most of that was LoSiP money, which a lot of it was spent on design already.
And that's already been paid for with LoSiP money.
That's correct. That's not in this budget at all.
So how much of the 400 is left to be paid for, would you say?
You know, I don't know. I'll have to ask the town engineer at this point. That's off budget. That's in LoSiP right now.
So we have, how much LoSiP money do we have available right now?
Right now, they've cut the LoSiP funding. It's on hold right now at the state.
So we anticipate.
But that project, which was going on for quite a while, is okay. I'm not worried about that at all.
Okay. So the town engineer will be able to tell us how much of the 400 we still have to come up with in this budget. Or
This
it's gonna-
budget, no, we don't have to come up with it all, anything.
So
It's all been taken care of already.
400,000 was all engineering work, and it's
That's
all
correct.
complete.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Because this project's been going on for quite a while in design phase. Okay.
I have a question for Dr. Freeman.
I'm all set?
Yes, that's
Okay,
nice, Joe.
thank you.
And my question is this, to have academic coaches, it costs the town $900,000 for 9 coaches. And I have talked to administrators in Maine, the state of Maine, Pennsylvania, and I know a coach out of New York City. And I asked them their opinion, if you have a coach that's basically just dedicated to being an academic coach, would it make sense for him to also teach a class? So if you have 9 coaches teaching a class, let's say for academically gifted kids, everyone benefits. The town benefits from the standpoint of budget. The kids benefit because now they interact with a superior teacher. And when I discussed with the administrators from Maine and New York City and so forth, they said that's exactly what they do. This person that I know that works in, I forget where in New York City, he is a coach, but he has a class. And then the same thing in Maine and Pennsylvania. So there are coaches, but they also teach. What's the feasibility of something like that in Guilford?
So the feasibility is, it's available to us. The advisability is something that I'd argue against for a number of reasons. One reason is that most of our coaches are scheduled at the elementary level. And so at the elementary level, to pick up a class is very difficult compared to the high school level. If you're thinking at the high school level, a teacher could be coach part of the day and just teach one English class. At the elementary school, a classroom teacher really is assigned to a class of students all day long. If you're thinking about the idea of pulling out talented and gifted or academically high achieving students at the elementary level, that is something that we have in fact philosophically moved away from. I would direct you to a report that was conducted about 2 years ago. Dr. James Borland is a nationally recognized expert in talented and giftedness. He came to us from Columbia University, Teachers College at Columbia University, spent time looking at our program, and one of the first recommendations that he made is he would not advise Guilford Public Schools to go backwards creating pull-out talented and gifted programs. He advised that we continue to meet the needs of those most able students in the mainstream classroom, and in fact recommended the expansion of coaching as the way to meet those students' needs more directly. In my mind, that recommendation might be structurally sound, but it begins a dilution of the coach as a full-time professional developer that I have seen in other districts that ends up diluting the effectiveness of that coach. Our coaches are assigned to central office. From central office, they're placed in buildings where they partner with principals, but we very intentionally restrict the principal from being able to assign lunch duty or recess duty or even instructional duties, because I really believe that having those coaches impact all the teachers then impact every student, and you have a multiplier effect. Anytime you think of a coach delivering direct service to a student, whether it's in a small talented and gifted program or in a remedial program, again with a small group of students, you're restricting that multiplier effect. If you have the coach, and we have a very small number of coaches, if you look at coaching cohorts in larger districts, ratio of coach to staff member, ours is very low in Guilford. So I would suspect that the folks you spoke to may have either a richer resource to draw upon, they've got more, or I just don't think they're following the proper model. We limit the number of coaches by having them deal only directly with teachers, and that gives us the multiplier effect that we're working towards. If we ended up needing to make a reduction for the budget, and if that needed to impact the coaching model, I would look at it very differently. I would look at restricting the number of grade levels. I'd look at taking another year to roll it out, but I'd be very resistant to having those coaches pick up direct instructional. I just don't believe you're getting the best leverage for that position that way.
Anything else? Mike, you said gentlemen for...
Well, I have a couple, actually.
Okay.
I'm going to save the one that I was going to close with. You know, there was, on the tuition.
Yes.
We know we're running over a little bit on this year. And, you know, something that was handed out to us at our last meeting was very, very eye-opening, and it had to do with, and I know to be very, very careful about private public tuition, but the numbers that were projected are, it shows how volatile these numbers are. When you budget for, and I'm just going to group it together, you know, 38 students for, I believe, a total amount of 2.4 million, and it ends up being 36 students, just two less, and it actually is 2.8. And I think that's something that's very eye-opening to us as a board, that was presented to us, that, you know, for tuition alone, the way that rides, where you think you have the students right, and you actually go down in the number, and it goes up by $400,000. And I thought that was very eye-opening. On the capital.
Yes.
The projects that are in there now, are there any projects in the capital that are not going to be done this year that were requested? And when I say not the bonded, but in the capital site improvements. were there any projects, specifically, because I know 77,000 was cut from the Board of Ed. Are there any projects capital? And I know Cliff's not here to really answer that, which he would probably be able to, but I don't know if you know that.
That's a moving target as well. There's two different kinds of maintenance that goes into that site improvement line. One would be specific projects that Cliff calls out and plans for. And so in this budget specifically, that has the renovation of a number of classrooms at Adams to make those classrooms more appropriate to service the special education program that we're going to be placing into that setting. So that's a specific project, there's a specific dollar amount allocated, and that needs to be done this year. Whether or not there were projects of that nature that didn't get done this year, I'm going to apologize and tell you that I don't have a short list of those. But the other type of project, and we've worked very hard at this board's urging over the last 6 years, is to create certain allowances for things simply like carpet replacement, tile replacement, ceiling tile replacement, blind replacement, so that every year there's an allocation to replace a certain amount of carpet, rather than waiting till the carpet reaches a point where the parents, the teacher, and the principal are complaining because the carpet is sticky or somebody believes their child's becoming sick because of a specific carpet that then gets replaced because it's gone beyond its usable life. Those are the sorts of projects that got curtailed last year because of the reduction that was made to that site improvement line. So there would have been wet ceiling tiles or damaged floor tiles or carpet that has gone beyond its useful life that we would have preferred to have replaced. There might have been regularly scheduled painting that would have been done. All of those maintenance things that you do in your house, not because it's necessarily absolutely necessary this year that you repaint the kitchen, but because the kitchen's starting to look dingy and you want to repaint it before you stop having company over. Those are the sorts of projects that we cut back on last year and didn't keep up with because of the reduction in that site improvement line.
I'm glad you pointed all that out. That's why I asked you the question. I commend you for doing that, because although there's there's a 34% increase in capital on that site improvement line, it is needed. Mm-hmm. And I commend you for that. And I was concerned when I saw there was a cut to that, to get to that number. So I just want to make sure the projects were being done. My last question is simply this. As far as there was a slide that was shown at our meeting in February, at our Board of Finance meeting, and it showed the different percentages that the Board of Ed across the state that had already presented budgets, what those percentages were. I'm just curious, do you have any update on where those numbers are in comparison to ours? Because ours was, I believe, the lowest that was on that chart.
Yeah,
and I think it's very valuable to mention.
Specifically, if you're speaking about DIRG B school districts,
yes.
I know districts that are coming in at 3.5% requests this year. Thank you very much.
It's kind of small, but...
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to read that. So we have districts coming in at 3.1%. We have districts that are coming in at 8.44% in one of the districts that we benchmark ourselves against. 2.63%, 2.47%, 4.65%. Now, I know that there are other districts in the state of Connecticut that aren't necessarily housed in DIRG B who have been working with 0% increases for some years, and they're dismantling their school systems to be able to maintain a 0% cost increase when the cost of doing business and running a school system increases every year. So last year, for us to come forward, or to ultimately receive, rather, a 0.6% increase, and this year to be requesting a 1.49% increase, keeps us below the rate of inflation 2 years in a row, which makes it difficult to continue to improve performance and not end up dismantling that school system. We presented a budget this year that we feel enhances instruction, moves us forward, provides some services that we hadn't provided previously. We have leveraged a significant savings in medical expenses that are part of the teacher bargaining group and the administrator and all of our other bargaining groups to continue moving forward. But we're low. A 1.5% increase in this climate is a small increase, and on the heels of less than a 1% increase last year, It has me concerned about being able to continue to move the school district forward if there were to be more significant cuts made here tonight. That being said, I recognize the difficulty of the decision that this board faces, and as Mr. Mazza said last week, we will work with whatever amount this board sees fit to fund us, and we will make the absolute best of every dollar that you provide us.
Thank you. Go ahead.
So I'll latch on to that word significant cuts there.
Let's just say cuts. Let's just drop the modifier.
So it just to pick just the hypothetical range. I mean, it's from between $100,000 and $150,000 worth of cuts. Just broadly, what categories would be under consideration if in that size range?
If we were looking at $100,000 or $150,000 cut, what I have discussed with the leadership team is more of a strategy than categories, and it's the first time in my career that I'm actually thinking about timing because I'm so concerned about the categories. If we needed to absorb a cut of between $100,000 and $150,000, the first thing that I'd want to do is pay careful attention to our retirements and that retirement line. I begin to worry that we are over-relying on that. Last year we reduced during the budget cycle by $250,000 and counted on that as savings from retirements. This year we have already reduced our salary line by $200,000 in anticipation of retirements. I have 4 retirements in hand at this time, and all of them fall in shortage areas in the state of Connecticut. So at this time, none of them project a savings for us. They're going to be difficult positions to fill. But the first thing that I would want to do is watch a few more months unfold and see if there were any retirements that would push us above that $200,000 mark that we've already set, and try to count on those as offsets to that reduction. The second place that I would want to look at carefully, and I would want to call Milliman back in, but I would want to look at our medical contribution. We've made a significant reduction in medical because of the new negotiated agreements. I know that we have a bit of a medical balance at this time. I would want to look at whether we could cut our monthly contribution a little bit, and it creates a liability, but look at creating, riding on that balance to some degree. Mm-hmm. And finally, to Mr. Ailes' earlier point, we'd be looking at maintenance again. We cut maintenance by $250,000 last year, $250,000 last year. This year we've tried to put $150,000 or $130,000 back in. I would look to back some of that cost out of there. If it became a third in each of those buckets, that would allow us to absorb it, and I want to be careful about this. That wouldn't eliminate impact to students in the classrooms, but it would minimize it. It wouldn't be classroom size increases. It would be those continued maintenance pieces of classroom spaces that we talked about earlier, and it would limit our ability to hire in experienced teachers. Barbara Dudley, who used to sit on this Board of Education, would frequently congratulate this community for not always requiring that a principal hire a first-year teacher to replace a 30-year veteran, that we used to allow our principals some latitude. Last year there was a hard hiring cap, and if we're going to leverage savings out of the salary line, again, there will be a hard hiring cap. And over time, that starts to impact the experience and the impact of your teaching staff. But if we're talking in that range, those are the places that I would look first. If that range starts to grow, then we really need to begin looking at enhancements for this year. And I hate to say this, but before I would want to begin looking into math coaches, we'd begin looking at new programming that is being added this year before we would look at those instructional components. I'd rather try to find the reductions in those broader categories that I just named.
Thank you.
And I can have one quick follow-up on that. And really, on the heels of Mike brought my eyes back to technology here, there's $144,000 for laptop replacements at the high school. Do you know how many that is and how old they are? I mean, is that all in 1 year?
Yeah, that is part of a rolling refurbishment. Those are essentially to replace the staff laptops at the high school. Yeah. We're looking hard at whether or not we can meet that need with Chromebooks, but at this point, a number of the programs that staff are required to run, including the electronic gradebooks they keep that give parents real-time access to teacher gradebooks, need a hard drive to function. The teachers, the computers that the high school is currently working on, we cycle through. Those are currently 5-year-old laptops. It's part of a renewal calendar that we put in place. We don't want a teacher running a 10-year-old laptop.
5 years is old.
Yeah, but I recognize it's.
But so they don't stagger. I mean, that's the entire. It seems like that's the entire high school.
We do grade levels. So that's the entire high school. We did the middle level a few years ago, and we did the.
So you do.
Yeah, we stagger it across all of the teachers in the district, but the high school would be recognized as one target this year.
You estimate at this point that there will be 4 retirements.
No, that's what he's gotten so far.
That's what you've gotten so far. Last year, you had a similarly low estimate at this point in the year, and yet it jumped. How many did it increase by last year?
Yeah, last year we had approximately 16 at the end of the school year. The year before that we had 4 total. And in previous years, when we were going through the years that were identified as the years of educational reform, we looked at retirements that were in the 30s 2 years in a row. So, I don't think we're going to hit 30s because we moved out a significant portion of some veteran staff. I think it's realistic to suggest we're going to be between 4 and 16. Ken, part of the conversation that we had, though, is it's whether or not we recognize the savings is going to be contingent upon in what certification area that retirement falls. So of the 4 we have, I think all of them fall into world language, special education, or science at the high school level, all recognized shortage areas by the state, difficult to fill.
Yep, thank you.
Anything further? No? Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, well, I think it's time we got around to where we're going to go with these numbers. I'm going to get this out of the way, if you wouldn't mind. Sure. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I put them in front of you before. That was kind of unfair. I think we spent a considerable amount of time last Thursday talking about the need to do something more aggressive than had been presented to us related to the state revenues. I think it was pretty much everyone, and I know Jeff and Ken were not able to participate, but just to recap a bit, I think, as I said, I think to a person on this board, we felt as if the 20% reduction in the ECS was not sufficient enough. It was a good starting place based on some information, but we didn't think it was aggressive enough. And there was also some conversation about what are we going to do about the teachers, the teachers' retirement contributions. A number of people have suggested that that's DOA up in Hartford, but again, we don't know. So we also talked a little bit about some cuts, and we just heard both the First Selectman and our superintendent talk about some potential cuts. And I know there were some comments made last Thursday that folks on this board thought the budgets that were brought in were very, very, very good budgets. They were lean at 1.49% and at 2.37%. They are very good budgets. And it's hard to ask to go further, but that doesn't mean we necessarily won't, but it needs to be part of the discussion. So I took the liberty of running through a few calculations, and there are 6 sheets in each one of these, and I know, Ken, you probably have much better spreadsheets than I do, but the other Ken, not you. So what I basically did was I took two scenarios and ran it out against 3 different examples. The 2 scenarios were to cut 30% from ECS, realizing that could be a combination of, reduced ECS and a potential contribution to the teacher's retirement, which again I think is a little, I think is a non-starter, but doesn't mean it won't happen. And then I also ran a set of numbers with 35% reduction in the ECS. The interesting thing about 35% reduction is that takes out over $1 million in state aid to us. So I think that's probably the 4th sheet that I handed out to you reflects straight 35% cut to ECS. And you can see what it does to the budget. It's going to have an inverse relationship. The budget that had been presented to us earlier with the less conservative revenue forecast would have been a 2.17% increase. By bringing it to 35%, it brings it up by a half a percentage point to 2.67. Now, if we did it at 30%, which is page 1, you see that the number goes from 2.17 to 2.50 in terms of a tax increase. Mind you, the spending increases still stay at 2.09%, and I don't want that to get lost in any of the scenarios that we talk about. A 2.09% operating a budget increase between the operating budgets of the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education and debt service, which I might mention, debt service is at 5.67% increase, a substantial increase. So that just means that the operating budgets of the Board of Education and the Board of Selectmen were very, very, very strong budgets. So, so there you see the difference just on straight ECS cuts. And then I took the opportunity to run anticipated cuts of $100,000 or $200,000 total, and we can certainly talk about how it's split, but this called for $100,000 from the Board of Ed and $100,000 from the Board of Selectmen. And at the 30% cut to ECS, the increase would be 2.27, which was somewhat of a familiar number. That was a number we were working with before we adjusted the golf course revenues. If we went to $250,000 in operating cuts, that number goes to 2.21%. Let's flip over to 35% with $200,000 in cuts, and again split evenly. That takes the increase to 2.44%. But what's of note here is that drops the expenditure budget down to 1.88%, under 2%. And then if we did the same thing, 35% cut, 125,000 each, or 250,000 in cuts, the number drops to 2.38% tax increase and a 1.82% spending increase. So I put that out there sort of just as a straw man for what people are thinking. If other folks have other numbers that they've played with, certainly be happy to discuss those. But I just open it up to the board to see.
What are you using when you're talking cuts to ECS? What are you using as the budget, current budget for this year's number before your 30?
We're using the adopted budget 2.91. That was the same formula that was used.
But the one that was published in the paper has 2.3.
They must have taken the mid-year cut out of it.
2.329
yeah.
reflected a 20% reduction, the 5% that was cut by the Moore Commission in January,
right,
and an additional 15%. So
but that's the number that people are using when they're talking about the current budget that's presented.
Presented to us, that's exactly.
The 2.09 and the 0.65 mils and everything. So
right,
when we talk about a 35% cut, when I talk about a 35% cut, I talk about 35% of that number, not of the 2.9 that's already been cut.
Okay.
So just to be clear
just
on
to be
that.
clear, yeah,
Okay.
that's a good point, Ken. It's an overall cut against the original baseline, because those are the numbers that was the way it was presented to us by the finance office. That's a good clarification. So the number, just so people know what the number is, at a 35% cut to the ECS number, it goes from 2.9 million down to 1.89, almost 1.9 million. So it's over $1 million cut in the ECS revenues. And again, I want to make the point, it may not all be ECS revenues, it may be some ECS revenues, and it may be some contribution to the teachers' retirement fund, if the state decides to go that way. Any other questions?
No,
I
I still don't agree with doing it that way, but that's okay.
Okay.
It's just numbers at the end of the day, so we can get to the same number.
Same number,
just a different percentage.
however we do it. Exactly. Exactly. Well, at one point I was thinking just a hard number.
Yeah.
I picked 1.1 million or something.
Well, I think that's ultimately
and we
where we're going to go.
still get relatively close. Just even numbers tend to work better, 35, 30, that kind of thing.
So, you want to talk about these? Do you want me to? My quick comment is, So the budget, as it now stands, has us getting $2,329,335 in ECS aid.
Yes.
It has us getting an additional $654,000 in MRSA, which is part of that other revenue line,
Yep.
which is not detailed here, but we got it on a separate handout. So that's another $654,000. It also includes roughly $1 million, it's a little over $1 million in expected excess cost grant monies. It doesn't include any payments to the state. You know, the original proposal is for us to pay $2.8 million. As I said last week, I don't think it's likely that we're going to have to pay the $2.8 million. However, I do think the state has a good chance of coming after it through these other mechanisms, i.e. aid, that we have in our budget now. If you just want to focus on so to add up those numbers that I just threw out there, it's basically $4 million. So if the state were to take away all of our current budgeted, as I see it, and I'm probably missing a couple of little ones, but if I take away $4 million from the budget that's before us now, we can do nothing, and we can take $4 million out of the rainy day fund, or we can incorporate that whole $4 million, this would be one extreme, into the budget, and to me that would raise taxes by 6.76%, and it would get our mill rate up to 30.61. And in essence, that's to have the goods and services that we currently have, and to have what is in this year's budget without any going back and asking for any cuts. And it's assuming that the state says we're going to cut off all your aid and not make you pay into the teacher's pension fund. And this is an extreme case. I happen to think that it's one that's likely to come to fruition, if not this year, over time in the next 2 or 3 years. So I think it's something we have to ultimately prepare for. But again, that would result in a mill rate of 30.61, or close to what Ted was talking about when he got up. I think my proposal would be to do something less severe. I think ECS is going to go away. Is it going to all go away? I personally would err on the side of conservatism. I'd like to say take $2 million out of the ECS and take nothing out of anything else. That would, if we didn't pass anything on, that would get our mill rate up to 29.95. It would be a 4.46% tax increase. We could ask, I think we talked about the other day about going back to the Board of Ed and the town and asking for cuts. I think the cuts we're talking about are significantly greater than the $75,000 that Mr. Mazza suggested, and the 100 to 150 that we were talking about on the Board of Ed. I think that just is a repeat of last year, where those aren't meaningful cuts to me when you're talking about numbers of $2 million to $4 million in reduced aid. So, having said all that, if we are wrong on our revenue assumptions, I think it would be sad and unfortunate to make cuts that might require headcount reductions and then have it be wrong. So we certainly don't want to upset programs or people's lives and not have any of this come to fruition. So I would propose something that's in between, so cuts that aren't jobs. So I'd like to see capital type items and maybe the police vehicles get postponed for a year, just to name one, not to pick on Jeff out there in the audience. And then we could take that money that we save. So we take $2 million out of our revenue cut. We try to get $1 million out of reductions in the budget, which leaves us $1 million hole if we're right, which we're clearly not going to be spot on. That $1 million would have to come out of the rainy day fund if we did in fact prove to be spot on. In the event we get the money from the state, this is what I talked about the other day, any programs that were deferred, that we asked to be deferred for a year, we could put at the very top of the queue for next year, so that if the state gets its act together, which I don't think it will, but if it does, then we can reinstate anything that was cut as a result of this request and put it right back to the top of the year, because we would have the money from the state that we didn't budget for this particular exercise. So that's conceptually where I'd like to go. And then it's just a function of the magnitude. Do you want to take out 2 million or 4 million or 1 million? And what kind of cuts are you going to ask for? But I think at the end of the day, if the state does come back and hits us with $4 million, I don't see how you can not expect to have layoffs next year. I just don't see how you can not have headcount reduction if this is the new norm going forward. So I hope I'm wrong.
So do I. So do I. All right. Others?
I mean, it hits me that it is a problem that is going to roll on for the foreseeable future with the state. This has been a long time developing, and I think it's going to take a long time to solve. We don't have sufficient information. We try to rely on our legislatures. I try to rely on the fact that the governor doesn't unilaterally get to make this decision. And as I said the other night, I think some of it was happening for reasons that are really unrelated to the actual budget. Okay, there's this year's actual budget. I just don't see any practical way a $4 million cut would come from the state in 1 year. Do I see that happening over the course of 3, 4, or 5 years? Potentially. And my feeling is that the 35% number, roughly $1 million from last year's original scheduled ECS dollars, and we use ECS as a basket, but it's just the easiest chunk for them to cut, recognizing they could jigger those around. But so that's why I kind of gravitate to the 35% number. It's a significant number. It begins to anticipate the ongoing problems we're going to deal with from the state. It shares the, it keeps, it'll keep this budget in a very tight range going forward. I mean, if you reduce that kind of revenue on an ongoing basis, I think we're going to continue to see the discipline that we've seen from both the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen over the past few years. But with all that said, I'm always mindful, and we didn't have, unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of speakers this year. And I think it is really helpful to have people from the community come and speak at these meetings, and it's even more helpful when they're passionately concerned about one side or the other. And I think it's important to hear from folks who are worried about tax increases, and I know I'm mindful of it. I just from working with this group, everybody's mindful of that. So the prospect of in 1 year guessing that the state's going to take a drastic position and impose that on our community, I don't think it's likely, or I don't think it's fair, frankly. So I would start with the $1 million cut, and I would, in order to ameliorate to a certain extent the impact on the mill rate increase, I would find $200,000 of spending to cut, and just for one person, I would divide it $80,000 from the town and $120,000 from the Board of Ed, roughly, 2/3, 1/3, and that's how I would allocate the revenue cut. The spending cuts, and the impact from the revenue would end up increasing the taxes a modest amount. You'd still be under a 2.5% increase.
35% of the number, the 2.9. You're only talking about reducing your revenue assumptions from the budget that we've published by $436,000.
Right, another $436,000 on top of. But think about it, on top of $500,000 that's been cut already.
$1 million total.
I mean, you're working from a published budget that already took into consideration by the Board of Selectmen significant cuts in revenue. So I'm not working from that point. I'm working from last year's previous budget, and that comes to $1 million.
So you like taking 436, asking for 200 from the departments, and assuming this is all accurate, obviously.
Yes.
And having 200 come out of the rainy day fund.
No, nothing.
I would take $200,000 in spending cuts. I would have. I'm not
But
balancing. I'm not balancing. I would
but you're
increase the
reducing by
taxes a little bit more.
Oh, just bump the taxes up
By
by
2/10.
Okay, fine.
So, and again, my thinking is there. 2.5% is the threshold, as Matt says. Round numbers. Not everybody, unfortunately. Well, unfortunately, a tiny number of the town is here. Not everybody's going to see this. people are going to see numbers in the newspaper, I think is, round numbers matter. And I think keeping it inside of 2.5%. So that takes a little hit. The spending from both the schools and the town take a little hit, and our revenue takes a hit, and which I suspect is going to be something we're going to have to revisit. But I would be more willing to revisit another significant cut next year rather than do it all this year.
What do you think the public wants to see? I have no idea. I'm just because obviously the choice is to assume a big reduction and have a higher mill rate, but no impact on the rate.
Depends on which public you ask. So I see this as a plate. I used to see it like a seesaw, but it's not a seesaw. Really, it's a plate that's on a spindle, right? And so there's people who want to see zero. I don't think that's realistic. There's some people that want to see, the school system that's essentially functions like a private school. I don't think that's realistic. I think we have a wonderful public education system, but there's people who would, there's always something more, and that's not a problem. There's employees that have in past years been, gone through some austerity, and then in other years, go back far enough, had some pretty generous raises. There's a lot of balancing interest there, and I try to keep that on that spindle.
If you go over 30 mill rates, 30 basis points, I think that's really kind of the kiss of death, more or less. I think it's going to basically demand the public's going to reject the referendum.
What happens?
What number are you saying here?
The mill rate.
30. He doesn't want to see the mill rate.
Yeah, I'm not going to be. Well, you're looking at me. You should be looking at Ken.
Well, the mill rate's going there. It's just a function when it gets there. It's on its way.
I think it's going to be a negative.
What happens if you're wrong and we get a big cut in the state? Then are we taking it out of the rainy day fund?
That would be a last resort, but that is the fund of last resort.
I think we heard some commitments the other evening that it could come from a variety of places. Additional cuts from the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen, mid-year cuts, because I heard commitments that neither Mr. Mazza or Mr. Bloss were in favor of sending out a supplemental tax bill. So, and I think there was some flexibility expressed in terms of revisiting the spending, even though it had been authorized. Just because we authorize it doesn't mean we have to spend it. And I don't know the legal, I haven't looked at the state statutes relative to what a Board of Finance can do in terms of controlling spending once the budget has been approved by the legislative body. I do know, once we give the money to the Board of Education, it is theirs to do with as they see fit. I don't know how that works on the town side, but honorable people being honorable people, I think we had some assurances that we would relook the spending side of the equation, in addition to looking at some application of one-time funds. We currently have over $2 million sitting in our health insurance fund, which is 2.2%, 200% of our average monthly expenditures. It is rich. But let's remember something. Once we use a one-time revenue source, you've got to find a way to make it up going in subsequent years. So the fund balance is now at what, 7.8%? We haven't, we'll find out in a week's time when we get the audit.
In dollars?
Yeah, no, percentage-wise. It's over 8%. Dollars, it's going to be what, 7?
It's going to be
7.5?
8.2 million.
All right. So we've got some room there as well. But I think it's a combination of things that we would have to look at.
So I'm going to sort of touch on the fund balance question too, because I know people will use that as a sort of a gotcha point. And so if we had a fund balance at 15%, and there are towns in the state that have double-digit fund balances, right. I would submit, and if I was on that board, that it would be irresponsible to continue to tax people to a point where that has to go in one direction and one direction only. I don't know that we're there yet. 8% is a safe number.
TFOA advises that you should have 2 months of your revenue.
Okay.
For us, that would be 15 million.
Yeah.
15 million.
That's a lot of taxpayer money sitting on the sideline.
Yeah.
I think that's too high.
I think it's high. That's what they advise. I agree.
Right. And there's very few towns that do. There clearly are some that have it, but there's very few towns that do have.
Our neighbors do.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I've seen the numbers, and it's not half the towns in the state. It's less.
I think you pointed up, or I just want to clarify to Mr. Mayo and Mrs. Moriarty, we don't have any impact on how the Board of Ed allocates. We have no impact on.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking that at the
So we
time.
really
We
don't.
can take the money from the rainy day fund for that.
Good point. So in any event, I'm not advocating that, and from everything that I'm hearing, I think it's incredibly unlikely. But I think just guessing, and that's to a certain extent what everybody's doing here, because we don't know what the state's going to do. The governor's been taking a position that's made us make a lot of hard decisions. I think $1 million is a big step towards solving what the state can do to us next year and the year after.
The other thing, I just to follow up, the one thing that I've come to learn in the few years I've been on the board is that I've been impressed with the department's abilities and the Board of Education to adapt to changing financial circumstances throughout the course of the year, whether it's in spending freeze with regard to supplies or moving staff around into positions where they're providing the services that the town citizens have come to expect, but doing so in a more cost-effective way. And so I agree that I don't think it's likely that the state's going to take all of the funds away, but if they took away more than what we had anticipated, I have no doubt that the Board of Education and the town would find a way to continue to provide the services as best they could. Having said that, I do think that the 35% figure, and again, that's off of the $2.9 million figure from last year's adopted budget. I come in a little bit lower than the 35% figure, but I do think that's a good number. My take would be to increase the cut slightly to $300,000 with dividing that by two-thirds Board of Ed, so $200,000, $100,000 for the Board of Selectmen, but that would be my suggestion. That would come up by hopefully not terribly inaccurate math, would be an increase in the mill rate of 0.65 mils for a 2.26% increase over last year's budget. So, but I think that gives us some protection against a reduction from funding from the state. It contributes reduction in costs, and if the numbers that we've estimated from the state are inaccurate and we've got surplus funds, it shouldn't have too dramatic an impact on the services that the Board of Education is providing and the Board of Selectmen are providing. So that's my take.
Okay. Others? Any other comments? Thoughts?
On Thursday I was thinking initially, looking at the numbers, just off the top of my head, I was thinking, double the amount that was going to be pulled out for revenue. So just instead of the 5, and actually the way it works out is 5% was reduced from what we received last year, or going to what we budgeted. There's another 15%, and I was thinking just going another 15%. So that goes into the 35% range. So I was thinking along the same lines. And then I was just thinking about just somewhere between $200,000 and $250,000 cut on both budgets. Hadn't really thought too much about the split of it, but that's certainly up to negotiation. But I do know that the Board of Ed has already come in extremely low. And we all know that these budgets, they came in, how well they were crafted. Is there room? Sure. But, one of the things I would ask is, or be concerned about, and I didn't hear it from Dr. Freeman, but, what is the substantial cut that you look at 90% of the people that showed up at the public workshops wanting swim and cheerleading? At what point do you hit that threshold where you mentioned we might have to hit new programs? I know that the amounts are extremely small, but so were a lot of things last year when you were cutting, because otherwise cheerleading wouldn't have been there. So, I understand the climate, and I want to be conservative on the revenue, but to go to Mr. McKenzie's point, if the state did really hit us with a huge amount, that's where you have to seriously consider some major issues with, programs. Does it go to class size? Maybe. I mean, that's not our fault. That's not due to poor crafting of budgets. It has to do with a really unfortunate incident where the state really hit it, really got it to us. I agree with Mr. Federici. I don't think it's going to go there, but we have to do a lot better on the revenue side and cutting than what is initially proposed, just to be conservative, just to be more protective of what could happen. And I think it's going to go over a period of time, not in a one year or 2 year swoop.
I too am comfortable with a 35% cut, and hearing what we've all said here, I could be comfortable with a 250 cut combined, 35 to ECS. As far as the division between the Board of Ed and the town, I could go either way. To me, it could be an equal split, considering what we have out there. But I too do not believe that we are going to get hit by the state with a thunderbolt. I mean, I think 35% is enough of a storm to face coming off the 20% that we had estimated. And we can always make further cuts down in the middle of the year, but I'd like us to agree to the 35% cut to ECS, build that in, and anywhere from 100 to 125 per division. So I could do, I don't go as high as Jeff or as low as Lou, but I think 250 would be a good medium.
I know you can see the outlines of the discussion in terms of the cuts already starting to form. Do we treat both entities equally, or do we go to the old-fashioned rule of thumb, which used to be, because the budgets are basically 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 Board of Ed, 1/3 Board of Selectmen. Do we apply the same kind of percentage to the cuts? I've never been completely comfortable with that, because there are times when budgets on either side come in substantially lower as a percentage, so I always wrestle with that. The Board of Ed came in at 1.49, largely on the strength of having renegotiated benefits packages, health care benefits, to a tune of a saving of $500,000. And the Board of Selectmen came in at another very strong year at 2.37 on the operating budget. I think I mentioned, last Thursday that over the last 3 years, or the last 2 years plus what's projected here, these budgets have been very, very nominal increases. So I can go either way in terms of how we put the split out there between the two entities. I don't know if how other people feel about.
I want to add to something that this is in the context of adding a 5.6% increase to debt service, to pay to the last big installment for the high school. I mean, so that's in here. It's being absorbed over the course of a number of years where the budgets have actually gone down overall, despite having to absorb that impact.
Right.
Yeah, the debt service goes up by about $450,000, I think it is, this year.
Right,
roughly.
422.
Yeah.
So the town and the Board of Ed go up by about $1.5 million. Mm-hmm. The debt service is about $450,000.
Yeah.
Of the $1.5 million, half of that are salaries, so it's really only up by $750,000 away from salaries,
Right.
is what the proposed budget is. But what is not in here, and what I asked about the other day, is it is in our projections, but next year this bonding request that we have here now is going to add another $400,000 to these numbers next year. So this is.
In the bonding, we will not get
It's not
relief from the bonding for
in fact, it's going to get worse again.
4 years. It'll start to drift down. But that bonding, as I understood it, and our finance director is not here, but as I remember it correctly, the impact of this proposed bonding was in the bonding chart that we saw.
Yeah, but it's not in the numbers. My point is, you still have another real $400,000 you have to come up
Fair
with
enough.
next
You're
year.
going to have to absorb that. Right, fair enough.
And we are, and we must consider additional bonding issues.
Yeah, I think, again, this is another area where things have improved. I don't see it as a bad thing. The bonding it's going to be up. We've got to absorb it. I appreciate it. We're going to have to deal with the state against next year. That's absolutely accurate. But the fact that both the town and the schools are now on a biannual bonding program gives a little bit of a breather to the budgets. So while there are going to be some additional debt service next year, we're not going to have to deal with folding that into the next year's budget either. You get an opportunity to absorb that.
What about making a bigger cut in revenue assumptions and letting the departments have their budgets the way they are? So you're raising taxes. But
Taxes go higher.
yeah.
Taxes go higher.
So
I mean,
what
to me, a
percentage?
$100,000 cut isn't a cut. So why go out and potentially lose the swim team? Or why go out and
Well, that's
have
why I
one
asked the
person that we don't get to decide where these cuts are coming from? I can go through and I know where I would come up with some numbers, one of which I said already, not to pick, but there are a whole bunch of things like that I think that you could postpone. But why not? The point of the matter is, the goods and services that we want cost more than we are currently paying for them. And the state has indicated that it's not going to subsidize us to the extent it did before.
Well, the governor said that.
So the governor said that.
State has not confirmed that.
Correct.
There's
So
somewhat of a
we
disagreement between
So
the
we
two.
can err on. I just don't think our cut is really realistic. I saw the article. There have been job cuts, and there are job cuts announced, and I think I would like to see more of a cut in revenue. And if you don't want to cut don't want to go back and make them redo the budgets, I could live with that and wait till next year. But I think we have to be realistic on who's paying for this.
What's a realistic number to you?
I think he mentioned $2 million.
I wanted 2. I know you guys don't want to do 2. I don't know.
If I could.
Ken, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say, so if you cut 2, what was the number that you said on the tax increase?
We take out of we talk 2 now, are we talking in addition? I'm talking 2 in addition to what's already in here. So if we take 2,
I can't go that.
Yeah.
So
the mill rate would be 29.95. It'd be a 4.46% tax increase.
So then, and I'm just asking, based on your question to Lou before, which was, so what's the number? What's the public willing to
Again, well,
to
that's
do?
the issue. That might get shot down immediately because of and they might want to see headcount reduction.
Right. So it's a chance that you take. I mean, anybody who looks at a 4-point-something tax increase is, based on last year, I'm going to tell you, it's not, the public is not
Look,
going to.
I don't love it either, but the point is,
Understanding that it's not our issue, it's
realistic
their
in our
state
revenue
issue.
assumptions? And if we're not realistic, then eventually it has to get paid for. So we can get the budget passed and then say we didn't have the money to pay for it.
I think it's realistic to a point that we know that that we know that there's going to have to be substantial changes mid-year if we don't get the revenue that we're expecting. And to anticipate it, I think being conservative the way we are right now and looking at it, I just think having, we always question. I remember when I first came on the board, I was always thinking, okay, so what's the number? What is the percentage? I think our former colleague, Mr. O'Keefe, would come right out in December at the meeting and say, so what's your percentage? What's your number? And what is the number? Last year we did pretty well as a Board of Finance, as a Board of Selectmen, as a Board of Ed, sending something, and it got rejected twice. So it's a really complicated, process that we go through to try to figure out what that number is going to be. And one of the comments I was going to make is appreciating the public that's here. I mean, I'm concerned that it's been really, really quiet. There's been very little feedback, and that's what happened last year. And this year, I think we're doing an unbelievable job. When I say we, I mean, by the way, Town, Board of Ed, have done an incredible job in putting these together with a huge revenue drop. So
the other thing, sort of lending an argument to my proposal, is that based on the formula, the ECS formula, which isn't used anymore, we have been receiving significantly more money than we should have been receiving based on the old formula?
I had some data that suggested otherwise that I shared last Thursday on that.
Did I miss that data?
Yeah,
Is that
that was based on the ECS formulas, what we should be receiving as a result of the original ECS formulas. Because
I think we're getting, I don't have the sheet in front of me, but I think we're getting $1 million more than we should have gotten.
No, it was against the baseline from when
2011 was the last time I think it is.
Ken, I find your
So anyway, go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, I find your theory interesting and one that I think I can agree to. I can't go to the levels you're talking about. I do agree with you. 100,000 or 125,000 here or there is not that substantial. It may wind up cutting out things that we don't really want to cut out. So I could go along with making a more aggressive cut to the ECS formula, but nowhere near, not on the level you are. I just plugged in a couple of numbers. If we go to a 45% reduction in the ECS number against the baseline, the old baseline, that without any cuts to either side, that brings us to a 3% tax increase. That means cutting $1.3 million out of our anticipated revenue source from the state, which I think, if my math is correct, we had anticipated $4.8 million from the state this year. So that's a pretty substantial reduction from all forms of state aid to $4.8 million. Quibble with me, 45 or 40 or 35, but I can see, I can see my way to, setting that number at 1.3 million less than we got from the state and leave the two budgets the way they are.
I showed that would be a 3% tax raise, 29.53 mill rate.
Yep, a 3%, which I think is respectful of the voters, because as you mentioned the other night, and Mr. Zeus mentioned up here, there are probably going to be some other forms of taxation that our residents, our citizens, are going to be experiencing as a result of the problem at the state. And this is one of the three, I think, that it's reasonable to expect will be impacted this year up in the legislature. Quite honestly, and I think Joe can probably share this as well, or back me up on this, but CCM has a plan out right now to raise the state sales tax to 7%, and then dedicating a portion of that to municipalities, so that aid is not impacted. Basically taking that extra sales tax money and running it back through, most of it back through the municipalities, some of it going back to the state in form of revenue to general fund. And somebody has also said, what's the right number? Let's not kid ourselves. We're guessing. We're guessing. That's really what this is about. And 1.3, 1.1, 1.9. Again, I think it's all a guess. But I do like your idea, and I'm happy. I'm willing to go up. I don't know what 50% does. It probably takes it to 3.1 or 3.12. You can plug that number in easily enough, but. Let's see, 25, right?
When you're doing that, do 40 as well.
Okay. 3.17. 3.17 at 50%. 3 even at.
That's with no cuts.
That's with no cuts. That's right.
We got to be under 3, though. Psychologically, 3
Well,
is
that's why I'm
more than
asking about the
2.9.
40.
What?
That's why I'm asking about the 40% cut. And the 40 is going to be like 3.9, 3.8 actually changed.
It's too high.
Oops, that formula's not going to work if I do that. Not with 2 decimal places.
Almost 3.
Which one are you trying to do?
How about
50 is
0.46?
50 is 3.17.
Well, Peter just asked that a 3% is a threshold that you think we need to stay under?
Yes. Same with the mill rate. It's got to be
The mill rate, the mill rate increase, the tax increase, if we reduce the state ECS contribution by 44%, brings us to a 2.97% tax increase.
That's at 40%.
40% is going to be 3.27, I bet, versus 3.3. Hold on. Hold on. 2.83.
2.83% tax increase.
Tax increase. That's at 40% reduction.
And no cuts to spending.
And no cuts.
So if you did tack those couple cuts in spending back, another 200,000, and dropped it back down to like 2.6.
Right.
Get you close to
Right.
2.5.
And, you know, the more I think about Ken's position on this, the more I'm thinking I'm agreeing with him. Because if the state does something more drastic than that, now there's that 250 or 200 or 300, whichever number it is, for them to go to. And as I said earlier, honorable people being honorable, I'm sure that we'll be able to get them to make those kind of reductions. The legal niceties of the Board of Finance being able to do that to the Board of Selectmen, but I know that the Board of Education will participate. I see heads nodding in the back. So.
Well, Vinny's up at the state, so why would he give us this 20% reduction number? I mean, how was that established?
I think it was established as an early baseline as to what he and maybe his caucus would like to see.
Right.
Let's not forget something.
How about the Democrats?
Let's not forget something. If Vinny's number comes out,
We're in clover.
we're in tall cotton because we're gonna have an additional $800,000.
Run away with spending.
Yeah, well, no, we're going to have an additional $800,000 at the end of the year that we hadn't anticipated, which would fall to fund balance because.
But we've also have enough experience to see how we've talked about it tonight. The volatility with special education is there could be any number of things that would pop up during the course of the year
that usually do.
That we have to be able to.
Well, we had 2 referendums last year with a smaller increase in taxes. So, what would keep this referendum from failing?
We don't know. It's
a good question. I don't know how familiar the voting population is with what's been proposed with the state, but I don't think we know.
Well, people that want a flat, I think for somebody to argue for a zero budget increase, I think realistically, the most you can expect would be the $750,000 cutting to the non-salaried contractual obligations that are there. The debt service is the school. We can't make that go away. The salaries we can make go away with head count, but I don't think you can do that with the information that we currently have. I don't think it's prudent. I don't think it's fair to ask people to lop heads with the information that we don't have.
And not really having a good understanding what the impact would be to the services they get.
So, to me, a draconian cut would be to cut $750,000 to get. I think that's the most anybody can argue for based on the data that we have right now, and that would be difficult, I think.
Yeah, I just want your numbers, and I'd have to do the math on the Board of Ed side. But the salaries of the $664,000 increase on the Board of Selectmen, $272,000 of that is salaries, $217,000 of his employee benefits, $41,000 in other operating costs, and then $134,000 in capital. So of that increase, the Board of Ed has $175,000, and it is largely in capital is the increase there. So.
And just as a follow-up, the capital was the area that took a substantial decrease last year.
Right.
It should be said that with all of the scenarios that we've been running through, with the original one on the 35% cut, with the total of $250 to Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen, it took the town operating budget and the school operating budget under 2%.
Yeah, 1.82.
1.82.
Right.
And I think those are numbers that would appeal to the voters.
Yeah,
You ought to bear that in mind.
I'd agree with you, but I also think 2.09% appeals to voters. That's a pretty good number, given what we've seen in previous years, and the fact that we're carrying salary increases on both sides that are in the 2.25% to 2.5%, or maybe 2.5% range.
And
No, that is not. Yeah, and that's part of that as well. You're right. So I think it's a good job. I'll tell you what. I'm going to throw something out there as a straw man for a motion, and then see where it goes from there. I propose that we adopt a budget that is as was presented to us by the finance officer. That has been modified to show a $1,281,385 less in ECS than we had as the adopted budget number. So that's effectively a 44% cut in the anticipated ECS revenues. Spending to remain as was presented to us at $28,738,999 for the town operating budget, $7,879,034 for the debt service, and $58,770,136 for the Board of Education operating budget. That would result in an anticipated tax increase of 2.97%. And I put that in the form of a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Discussion? Any further discussion on it?
Yeah, I'm still working on it here.
Yeah, all right. Take your time.
So that's a 2.97% increase in taxes, and what would the new mill rate be?
The new mill rate would be 29.52 from 28.67. Do we want to take 5 minutes? For people to...
Hypothetically, if the ECS cut comes in at 37%,
Right.
what do we as a town do?
We would have revenues in excess of projections, which, if form holds true, would fall to fund balance at the end of the year. So let us hope that would be the case.
So you're proposing what, 2.97% increase?
Yeah. So basically it's a 44% knock on the ECS.
On revenue.
Yeah. For me, it was B25 times 0.56.
And you did the 44 instead of the 45 because you didn't want to hit 3%?
Well, Peter made a point that he thinks there's a psychological barrier at the 3%.
I think it's lower.
What's that?
I do too.
I do
think
too.
it's lower. The psychological barrier.
Yeah. I think the barrier is closer to
I appreciate what Peter's saying. I certainly do. And I agree that over 3 is, I really think it's got to be in the 2.5.
That's what I thought.
I think you're right.
At least.
I agree with you.
If it's, I mean, we got to get, yeah. We know that the budgets came in very well, and we know that we can go someplace if we have to, based on cuts, because the Board of Ed and the Board of Selectmen have been able to do it at the expense of items that we don't want to see cut out of services or programs. But I think near 3 is too high.
What if you pushed it to 2.5 here?
That's the 30% cut.
30%.
That's the 30%.
30% with no contributions from the board.
No cut in spending.
Yeah.
That gets you to exactly 2.5.
It does.
That's the top sheet that Matt handed out.
That's what 35 would
I
be.
can't do it in my head that quickly.
Thank God for Excel.
That was impressed. I thought you did. Other comments?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. First one.
Which one?
The first one, 30%.
And no spending cuts.
And no
That's
spending
right.
cuts.
First one.
You mean 35%?
No, 30%.
Okay.
First page, first sheet.
First
and
sheet,
2.5% increase in taxes, and the new mill rate will be 29.39.
So no spending cuts, just a revenue cut. is what you're
Just the
talking
revenue at 30, right?
about. Right. All right.
No cuts to the town or the schools.
Correct.
Ironically, I tend to agree with what you say when you say that a couple $100,000 cut is trimming away. We're going to trim some capital, maybe push it around to another funding source. There's going to be changes that aren't going to really have enormous differences, but I can't get behind, and I know you're not necessarily proposing it, but a $750,000, which is a significant number. So there's just these competing tensions. I like the 2.5% target as well, and if we can get there with this 30% cut and leave the spending as it is, and then just anticipate that we would have some cushion mid-year, which isn't really going to be mid-year. We're going to know where things stand in July. So they would have the balance of the year really to work around any problem. So that's sort of where my thinking ends up coming
Then I
close.
think I need to withdraw my motion if that's going to become one. So I am going to hold up. You're still discussing it?
To me, what we're talking about here now is just not only are we not cutting expenses, we're only cutting our revenue assumptions by an additional $290,000.
And that goes
I
back
mean,
to... Go ahead.
The people that want these, well, you got two sides. You got the people that want the budget and the people that don't want the budget. The people that want the budget should be willing to pay, even if it's 30 mils, if they should be willing to understand that we can make an aggressive assumption on revenue with the understanding that if we're wrong, that you get the money back. But, and the ones that want the cuts, you got to make more cuts than we haven't made any cuts, so we haven't appeased them and we haven't even addressed their concerns.
You got it exactly right, though. The folks who want a dramatically lower tax increase are going to need $700,000 range cuts, which I would not consider. I mean, I'm just not going to do that. And I know there's a big portion of the community who supports that. Now there's a big portion of the community that's against that, and that's the tension that we're feeling. But I just don't think I don't think that's responsible. I personally think that you make those kind of cuts, you pay for it down the line in some other way. Things get more expensive over time if you defer them. Capital gets more expensive. Roads are a problem. Things become, pensions are underfunded, right? All these obligations get more. It's just deferring the headache, which is the very problem that the state has done, which has caused us to have this very problem. I'm not going to participate in that. So I see it as we're going to have to wrestle with revenue problems from the state again next year, and we'll be in a position to see what the priorities are next year and deal with it next year. But for 1 year, to me, $900,000 is a big chunk of money to take out of a revenue budget. And
we haven't paid for it. We haven't
we haven't
the offset to it.
The adopted budget was $2,912,000, and over the course of the year, they took $100 and some odd thousand, and now we're taking another $750,000 out of it. So you keep saying that, but that's not completely accurate. We're working from last year's adopted budget.
I'm not going to. This is not the time to go through and talk about how many of these we don't have to purchase, or how many of those we don't need to purchase, or.
Well, some of the capital could be put off, which,
The capital could be postponed a year. We did that last year.
We did it last year. That's right.
We may do it next year, too. That's the
Right.
problem.
that's the problem.
Right. Well, Sensing little support for my motion, I will withdraw it. Someone want to put another motion on the table, or is there?
Look, let me just speak one more time. We all know that we shouldn't be going to referendum in a few weeks anyway, based on the information we have. So why not throw something out there and that's, instead of trying to walk the middle line and get this budget passed, why don't we err one way or the other and see how people respond? Because there's I think there's a high likelihood that we're going 2 referendums anyway.
Could be.
So if we go right down the middle, we haven't really learned, based on the number of people that have come to speak, we haven't really learned anything. Have we?
See, my concern with that is if we overcut this revenue and the budget goes down, the thinking is going to be, oh, okay, now we need to cut spending again. We're not going to actually add something back to that. I understand if it was this group and we were dealing with it.
Well, we have the opportunity, though, to go cut expenditures after that.
Oh yeah, no, and that's what it would do. So we would cut revenue dramatically, and then if it went to 2 referendum, we'd have to then cut spending, if not dramatically, certainly significantly.
And or we may have
more
a budget that was produced by
the state.
Both appropriations and revenue finance and bonding have to come out with budgets in early April. But their budgets will probably be out by the time we go to referendum.
April 27th is the appropriation.
Is approps coming out 27th, so it's afterwards. That's right.
So we'll have a lot more information. We can throw something out there that we have that is conservative, that we think has perhaps a real chance of failing. We go to second referendum, but by then we hope to have significantly more information out of Hartford. And then all we have to do, if that information is positive, all we have to do is readjust our revenue line and everybody's happy. And if the information is bad, then we know that we actually do have to come up with some more money or else pay for it now.
Except that's not what I'm
hearing. I'm hearing that these committees aren't voting until after the next, until after we'd have to act again. Or am I hearing that wrong?
I heard June.
That's the something budget. out that's going to fit.
Yeah, I was going to quibble with that. I don't think I
The
want
numbers are
to.
too high, it's going to fail, guaranteed.
Yeah, I don't.
Over 3% increase in tax rate is going to fail.
I don't think we've addressed the problem, so I think there are enough smart people in this town that are going to...
We are addressing the problem. I agree with you. We haven't fully addressed it. Hartford's in a big pickle, and we're going to continue to deal with that. This is a great first step, and hopefully we won't have to look at. And I'm going to insist on this using this $1 million.
No. With the 30%.
I would propose.
More that want to do that.
I'll make a new motion if you withdraw.
I just don't think it's. And I might be dead wrong, but I don't think it's conservative.
Yeah, I will withdraw my motion.
Okay, and I'd like to make a motion that, working from the adopted budget last year, which had, again, $2,912,239 there in state education, ECS funding, right? That we cut that a total of 35%, and so we would be looking at a cut of $1,019,284. Which would give us a tax increase of 2.67%, which is higher than some of the things we've been talking about, but does take us a step closer. It's $1 million cut. I mean, when I first thought about this, that was the number that appealed to me, and I think it's a significant step toward addressing the revenue problems that we're going to have to continue to face. I'd also like to say, I really don't like forming a budget based on the prospect of something negative happening in the referendum. I think we should do what we think is right, and that's from the first time we were really starting to wrestle with this. That's a figure that really appealed to me, and that's where I am. So that's what I'm proposing.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion?
I prefer the original
proposal that you made. Well, you didn't make the proposal, but it's the first sheet, 30% cut with no cut to the spending side.
You propose that 30% would get us to 2.5.
Yep, it would be an increase of 2.5% in taxes, and the projected mill rate would be 29.39%.
Now, Ken, you might find this out. I find myself falling more along your side, and which is why I put the put a bigger number out there. But it sounds as if the bigger number is not going to fly here, based on the fact that I had to withdraw my motion. I could support the 35% cut. Again, knowing that, as you said, voters may reject this, but a 2.67% increase after taking $1 million revenue hit from the state, I think is still a good budget. It's a good budget largely because of the minimal increases in spending at the Board of Selectmen at 2.37% and the Board of Education at 1.49%, despite the fact that we have an over 5% increase in debt service. So I think a 2.67, which is what the number comes to at 35.
That's what it
is a good budget. Am I comfortable that it's going to pass? No. That's why we have referendums. And knowing that we may well have to come back and do something more drastic than what we've done. And we will have, we'll be close. Last week of April for the appropriations budget and the finance revenue and bonding. We go on the 19th. We may actually have to make if the budget does not pass, we may actually have to make a second decision prior to that, although I would probably hope that we didn't. We'd move it off, which would then only give us the opportunity to have a second referendum before the end of the fiscal year. So, anything further?
We might not know. Would there be, hope it isn't, a second referendum where the state is? It might be later.
But we're not. My bet is we're not going to know where the state is until June 5th.
Because they're going to get locked up.
Right. The only thing that's happening at the end of April is the finance revenue and bonding, which is the tax side, and the appropriations committee, which is the expenditure side, have to come out with their budgets at that time.
I think everyone is quite close on this. I'm responding to what Peter is saying about 2.5% being a psychological barrier. I tend to feel that way too, but between 2.5 and 2.67, I don't know what that's going to do. But it's still under 3, and I'm impressed with Lou's point about the $1 million cut in revenue. I think that's a significant thing. If we wanted to go further and go back and revisit the 200,000 or so from the two boards, that would get you down around 250 with a 35% cut. What's the sense of all of us on that?
I'm sorry, what was that last point, Ken?
Whether or not we go back to cutting.
Go back to cutting with the 35%.
Well, if you look at the next page that Matt prepared, it's a 35% cut with $100,000 cuts to the Board of Education and Board of Selectmen. That gets you under down to 2.44, which gets you below the 2.5 figure that may or may not be a psychological barrier. Maybe we adjust it so that we're at 2.47. It's not a substantial cut, but at least we can say, there is the argument can be made that there have been reductions made to get it below 2.5, and incorporating the $1 million reduction, maybe a 35%.
What we could say is everyone is fully responsive. Everyone is fully responsive, both on the revenue and expenditure sides.
I can accept that.
Go look into the minds of 22,500 people. Give me the answer.
With all due respect to the media,
that are in the room, and the camera, and the people watching. You know, when it comes right down to it, it's usually what's the expenditure increase? I mean, yes, the tax increase is important, but you usually see what's the expenditure increase.
2.09%.
And you could sit here and you say, well, is it 2, is it this, is it this? What's the percentage? What's the perception of what a number is? If you were to take 100,000 out of each, which we have the spreadsheet in front of us, at the 35% cut, for all operating and debt service, 1.88. That's an expenditure increase that is under 2, that is unbelievable in what we've seen.
Yes.
And the mill rate increase, the tax increase is 2.44, and it's under 2.5. And I think and to Ken's point, it may not be enough, but
Yeah, cameras